First of all, let me just say my name is Jim Murphy. I'm the Managing Program Director for Financial Resources here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I'll explain what ECF does momentarily, but let me just say briefly what we're going to be going over tonight. We'll be reviewing briefly a few notes about ECF for those of you who don't know the Episcopal Church Foundation. We will also be reviewing why so many annual fund drives do struggle. We'll focus on strategies to engage your very diverse group of donors in your parish, and if you think that your parish doesn't have diversity, you'll be surprised. Every parish is very diverse in a number of ways. Finally, we'll wrap up with how to communicate your parish's impact more effectively. Okay. Very briefly, the Episcopal Church Foundation, we are an independent and lay-led organization. Though we are not a part of General Convention, we solely serve the Episcopal Church, all of its parishes, dioceses, and related entities, all across the Episcopal Church. This is our focus solely. What we work to do is empower congregations. That's the tagline you see most often with the Episcopal Church Foundation. And we seek to strengthen the leadership and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and related entities to empower your ministry so that you can do the work that God has called you to do in your own unique and particular circumstances. Many of you out there today already know a lot about ECF, but for those who don't, ECF has two main program clusters, the first being leadership resources. Many of you out there already know about our many workshops and webinars that we do to develop leaders throughout the Episcopal Church. You also probably know about many of our resources, such as the Vestry Resource Guide, one of our most popular publications, and our tremendously popular and very useful Vital Practices website, which we will be sending everyone after tonight's webinar a direct link to ECFVP for vitalpractices.org. Fantastic resource for the entire church. In addition to that, the Episcopal Church Foundation has an area called Financial Resources, which I oversee here. And that encompasses many different things. We are able to help parishes, dioceses, and related entities on their annual giving and annual stewardship efforts, such as a part of the education that we're doing tonight. We do that education in collaboration with both the Episcopal Network for Stewardship and the National Stewardship Office of the Episcopal Church. We also are happy to link you up with numerous resources that are available across the spectrum. We are also the official resource for plan giving, and many of you may be aware of my name being associated with that. I do many of those workshops and webinars, but we can help any congregation throughout the country set up its own plan giving efforts, and we can support you in a number of ways. We also have an endowment management area where not only for free can we assist you in setting up endowment and gift acceptance policies to help build that level of trust and confidence among your donors, we can also help you invest your endowment if you need that. Finally, capital campaigns. And Capital Campaigns is our wonderful program where we have a geographically dispersed group of consultants, of whom Jerry and Aaron are both a member. And we are able to help any parish, diocese, or related organization to the Episcopal Church in its capital campaign fundraising needs. And we can assist you on a sliding fee scale. We're happy to help you in all of these areas, but without further ado, I would like to turn over the floor to Jerry Kuchar and to Aaron Weber-Johnson. What started this webinar actually was their work in the field. Both Jerry and Aaron have worked on a number of very specialized consultative opportunities with different churches across the country in their annual stewardship needs. And I'm very happy that we were able to pull together this wonderful webinar tonight and hear their wisdom. And so without further ado, Let's learn about how to correct our lackluster stewardship efforts. And Jerry Kuchar, I would like for you to take over the floor as I mute my phone. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm Jerry Kuchar. I'm besides my work for the Episcopal Church Foundation, I'm the priest in charge of St. Mary's Church in Brooklyn, New York. And I've done a lot of thinking about church finances and how churches think about their money and how they motivate their members to give. My conviction is that the leadership is extremely important. People want to be well led. They respond to good leadership, and so if things aren't going well in the financial area, I would just ask you as the leadership of your parish to do a little bit of self-examination. This isn't a question of blaming people for things that are going wrong, but just understanding that your people want your parish to succeed. They love it. They want it to thrive. And if they're not responding, maybe they're not being asked in the right way. And that's a leadership function. One of the things that I think is incredibly disempowering and for people and makes them not responsive to our efforts to get them to give is when we use any kind of language of obligation. Nobody is in church because they have to be anymore. They're there because they want to be. And so we need to connect our language to their desire to be connected to God. And so I think we need to use the language of desire. Why would they want to give to you? What would motivate them to give to you? They don't have to. And so have to, must, should, ought to, what I call passive-aggressive language of obligation. God is calling you to, we're not exactly, God is calling the church to thrive, but that doesn't mean that he's calling the congregation to raise their pledge by 10% next year. The language of obligation kills enthusiasm. And if the difficulty is that if things aren't going well, the leadership tends to be anxious, and anxiety is the opposite of leadership, and so the more you're motivated by anxiety, the harder it will be for you to communicate a motivating, positive message. But to communicate anxiety gives you a lot of control in the group, but it's very bad for encouraging people to give. So I would ask you, to think about your leadership and the way that you phrase things and the way that you say things. The annual pledge campaign is probably your biggest source of income. I hope it's your biggest source of income. If the parish is depending on the gifts of members for less than 2/3 of your budget, they probably think that somebody else's money is going to pay for the parish and that they don't have to do that much. So this is your most important source of income. So you want to put care and effort and planning and thought into how you ask and what you ask for. And if it's a last minute, oh my gosh, it's October, we have to write the letter and send out the pledge card, the results probably won't be sterling because the amount of effort that you as the leadership have put into it isn't going to get that much in the way of results. And here I'd like to make a distinction between, at least a distinction that I like to make, between stewardship formation and institutional fundraising. And by fundraising, I don't mean running church fairs or bus trips or fundraising events. I mean institutional fundraising, for me, is the way that you ask people to give to your parish. What that is fundraising in the sort of the not-for-profit model. And we use the word stewardship to describe our annual fundraising appeals, and but we don't usually talk about, we do bad fundraising techniques and we call it stewardship, and then we're surprised and upset when our people don't understand what stewardship means. To be formed as a steward is to come to understand yourself as a trustee of gifts that God has put into our care, not as the owner of those gifts in your own personal money. And in financial terms, I think that means stewardship formation means commending proportional giving off the top and not giving so many dollars a week or so many dollars a month. It was the experience of tithing as an adult that taught me what it means to be a steward. I mean, I did it not knowing what stewardship meant, but as soon as I'd started giving 10% of my money to the church at a time when I didn't have that much money, and it was sort of a definite act of faith, I immediately was converted in a way that I never had been before. You can't use what we'll talk about in a minute, bad fundraising techniques, and call it stewardship and imagine that your people are going to get the message about what we really mean by stewardship. Commending portional giving off the top can happen at any time of year, and people can always switch from so many dollars a week to so many dollars a month. And I think that when we present proportional giving as an obligation, the church says, the General Convention says that we're all supposed to tithe, it doesn't surprise me at all that not that many people tithe, because when you put tithing in the context of obligation, I mean, it just makes people do what they want to do, not what some, especially church authority figure, says that they think that they must do. Changing the pattern of giving from so many dollars a month to any percentage off the top of what you've just received before you do anything else has a different effect on you because it's a different experience. When we give so many dollars a week, we turn our gift to the church into the experience of paying a bill. We can think about it, we can try to think about it however we like, but the obligation comes up every week or every month, and we write the check just the way we write the check for our cell phone bill or our cable or something like that. When you start to give proportionally off the top, the first thing that you do is not think about how much money you have to spend on your bills, but you look back and see how much God has given you since the last time you dealt with your money, and you make a gift to God that's in direct proportion to the amount of money that God gave you. And that's a completely different experience from paying a bill. And so it has a different effect on us. When we're doing institutional fundraising, when we're writing those letters or making those pitches from the announcement time or something like that, I think there are only 5 different ways that everything that we say falls into one of these categories. The first one, of course, is the disaster one. We're not going to be able to make it. The bills are just too high. Our pledge base is dwindling. Don't use the sky is falling unless the sky has actually fallen. I mean, you've had a fire. You were seriously affected by Hurricane Sandy or some other disaster. When the sky has actually fallen, then you can tell people that the sky has fallen, and you can also tell people your plan for getting through that terrible bad patch, and then people will respond. But if it's basically the tenor of your annual appeal every year that the sky is falling and disaster is around the corner, it's not going to have any effect because people learn how to live when the sky is fallen. Do you remember those Department of Homeland Security color codes? The first time it went to orange, I thought, oh my gosh. I looked around on the subway and on the Staten Island ferry and stuff like that. But I couldn't keep up the anxiety level even for that first day. So people aren't motivated by that. Only say that the sky has fallen if the sky has actually really fallen. Otherwise, you're like a rug store that's run a going out of business sale for the last 10 years and somehow has never gone out of business. The pitch that most churches use when they're asking people for money, for pledge money for the next year, pledge cards for the next year, is the pitch, we have bills to pay, we need you to help us pay them. Come help us pay our bills. Despite the remarkable ineffectiveness of the approach, it's probably used by still 80 to 90% of parishes. To use a budget-based, bill-based approach to, oil is $4 a gallon, our insurance bill has gone way up, and anything that sort of helps turn people's gift into a dues or an obligation. We have a budget deficit of $20,000. We have, 100 parishioners. So everybody increase your pledge next year by $200. Sort of putting a surcharge on people. All of that stuff. Read the material that you've produced for the last several years and look at where you've communicated anxiety, where you've communicated need, we need you to do this, where you've communicated obligation, and try to figure out another way to say it that doesn't communicate those things. Team spirit is, I think, a pitch that we use a lot. It's what we do to say we're a wonderful group of people, we love this parish, we want it to do well and stuff like that. And so most of the time, those letters that go out in September or October with the pledge card say, we've got bills to pay, we need you to up your pledge by 10%, but we're a wonderful group of people and we can do this. But, team spirit is basically appealing to the emotional attachment that people have to the parish. It doesn't, which is great, but it doesn't have any context. When I was a kid, we went to pep rallies, before the big games to whomp up team spirit, but I was also never that much into sports, so I didn't understand why it was important to have team spirit. You got to give people some content about why they feel emotionally connected and how to act on that. And I think that what I call the National Public Radio or Public Broadcasting System approach is the best solid institutional fundraising pitch that's out there. You notice that when public radio and TV do their pledge drives, it comes in two parts. First, the pitch asking people to give doesn't really dwell on the bills that they have to pay. I mean, they do mention it, but that's not really where the emphasis is. The emphasis is on the programs that your money makes possible, and they try to make the connection. Your gift makes it possible for us to have Morning Edition or the News Hour or whatever it is, and you try to give people how to connect what they give to what the parish is able to do. Of course, paying bills is what allows us to keep going, but it's also what enables the programs that we have and the ministries that we have and the life that we have to go on. So you want to call attention to the life, the ministry, the programs, not to the fact that, you need insurance on the building. Of course you need insurance on the building. It's what enables you to do these other things. Talk about how people's gifts make those other things possible. And if you're able to articulate a vision for the future, a vision about what the parish can be with people's participation and what the people can become through their participation in the parish, that's an extremely powerful pitch. That's why capital campaigns are generally successful, because people know exactly what their money is going to be spent on, and they know that doing the work, the projects that are outlined in the capital campaign, will enable the parish to minister more effectively and be a more effective parish than if the roof doesn't get fixed or something like that. you want to bring the same kind of connection to the annual pledge drive and encourage people to connect with the ministry, with the program, with the work that their gift makes possible. And the second part, of course, of the NPR PBS approach is to say thank you, which we're often not very good at. Many parishes still don't send out a letter to the people who have turned in a pledge card saying thank you for your pledge, or thanking them, during the year for continuing to contribute. Of course, the NPR PBS thing does it 20 times a day before every program, again, making the connection. This program is made possible from the support of members like you. Thank you, members. That kind of thing is what gives people a buy-in, a stake in what you're doing. They're not just consumers, or bystanders, they're stakeholders, and you've made it that because of how you've communicated and what you've communicated in doing it. Now, my time is almost over, but with regard to the mechanics, sending out a letter with a pledge card is the least effective way of asking people for money. And yet it's the way that the overwhelming majority of parishes do their annual fundraising appeals. Some of you who are as old as I am can remember that every parish used to do an every member canvas. I mean, it was just, you did an every member canvas every year. I don't think it's by coincidence that the disappearance of the every member canvas happened at about the same time as the general decline of the mainline church. And so in a situation where we need to do a better job, we've been doing a worse job, and the results are what we might expect. What you now see is, what is that? I'm seeing anyway the index of the slides. The best way to ask people for money, it's another reason why capital campaigns generally go so well, because most of the time a capital campaign is structured so that every person who is going to be asked to pledge to the capital campaign receives a personal visit from somebody, from a canvasser, a member of the committee, a caller, an organizer, something like that. A committed person, in person, asking another committed person to support something that you already support is the most effective way of asking for money. Anything you can do that gets more personal contact into your annual campaign, whether it's cottage meetings, one parish in Manhattan does an every member canvas where they don't meet people in their homes, which in New York nowadays seems almost like a home invasion or an assault. They say, can I meet you for coffee, at a place that you both know, and you have a 15, 20-minute conversation with somebody in a neutral location, or anything that gets more personal contact than a mailing with a pledge card will probably have a good effect on your because it takes a lot to organize that. It takes more care, it takes more thought, and it's probably going to have a better result than something that's done with less care and less thought, and in a more hurried way. I've got to pass this on to Erin because she has even more to say. But are there questions about what I've said so far? And I've been talking like New York fast.
Yes, Jerry, Jerry, you've been talking Indiana fast, I would say, but you're doing just fine. There is at least one question, but before I read it, let me just encourage anyone who does have another follow-up question, please feel free to type that in now to the chat message. We will be able to review that. The question that's up on the screen, and Jerry, you can see that in your presenter notes, is in the Catch the Vision part, what are some examples of what members can be through Parish X?
The example that I saw is, a number of years ago, there's a very large church building in Midtown Manhattan across from the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, St. Bartholomew's in Manhattan, that by the early 90s had come very close to closing. The endowment was depleted. They'd been involved in a huge lawsuit over landmarking that they lost. It was incredibly divisive, and there were only 75 people in this church that seated 900. When Bill Tully came in as the rector, he was able to articulate a vision about what St. Bartholomew's could be in that part of New York City and in the space, the grand spaces that they had, and it galvanized people. Within 3 years, the pledging had more than tripled to over $1 million and kind of topped out at $4 million a year, and it was because he had a vision, and the leadership had a vision about what St. Bartholomew's could become. And he was also communicating to people, since they're there for a spiritual connection, he also was giving them opportunities that they could become spiritually connected through adult education opportunities and stuff like that. This is what you want. This is why you're here. This is what we're offering. This is what you can be. It's stuff like that.
Jerry, help? Yeah, I think so, Jerry. And we have time for one more question before we'll turn over to Aaron. And it's an interesting one because it is a challenge sometimes getting clergy to be as enthusiastic about some of the aspects of stewardship, quite honestly. How do you get rectors to agree to an every member canvas is the question.
Well, of course, I don't know the context out of which you're asking that question. I think many times if there's not a strong lay leadership core that does this, the rector may be, oh my gosh, I have to recruit all the callers and do everything. And of course, it's always a catch-22. The more dispirited the congregation, the harder it is to get anybody to do anything. But the only way you can sort of turn the dispiritedness around is by starting to do things and to show results that get people thinking, oh, something good could happen here. We can do something. And then, bit by bit, people will, if you've been doing letters with a pledge card for 20 years, you probably won't get to an every member canvas all in one go. The first couple of years, you'll change the content of your mailings so that it doesn't hit, the obligation key, and it connects people a little bit more to what the parish is able to do rather than the bills the parish has to pay. And bit by bit, you can get to a more personal thing. Start with your bigger donors. If you can't talk to everybody the first year, talk to the bigger donors. And, if they get on board a little bit and the amount of money that's raised in the pledge drive goes up, it'll allow other people to get on board.
Thank you, Jerry.
I think I need to turn it over to Erin, or I will be doing her a disservice because she has many things to say.
Yes,
Erin.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And we'll be taking more time for questions later on as well. But Aaron, would you please continue, because I think this is a good segue from talking about talking and working with donors more directly to how do you engage them? And that's a crucial factor. So go right ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, we've just spent the last little bit talking about what we want to move away from. And now this is a piece where Jerry had already begun to talk about what are some ways that you can incorporate new ideas. And that's what this next segment will be largely about, is what can you do? Now, before we move into nuts and bolts, I think it's really important for us to take a look at who is at your parish. Now, across the board, there will be 3 types of folks. And what I'm about to do is to talk a little bit about who you can expect to be reaching. Now, amongst the folks in your pews, there are a group of folks that we like to call the converted. Now, these converted folks faith relationship to God. Oh, just real quick, I want to ask, if you haven't yet muted, and you're just joining us, if you could go up to the very top and mute, that would be really helpful. Thanks. So the converted group give out of a sense of their relationship to God. Oftentimes, the folks that fall into this category are from the greatest generation, if we're talking about generational characteristics. What's very important about this is they give between 8 to 10% of their overall income. However, regardless of the messaging, regardless of how you ask, these folks are going to continue to give. These are your core in your parish, and they're the ones that have kept that parish going. We have seen a national trend that nationally on average, the frequency, the number of pledges has gone down, but the average pledge has gone up. This converted category has been the ones that have been able to make up that difference as the overall number have gone down. They're the ones that have reached deep into their restricted incomes and have given out of their sense of devotion to their faith. This is important because a lot of times people will spend a lot of their time talking to those that are already converted. Now, I want to jump down to the very bottom of the slide, the uncommitted. This is another group that a lot of times we spend a lot of time focusing our energies on to little result. These are the folks that might make an occasional gift at Christmas or Easter. Maybe they'll come when their child is being baptized or for a wedding, and we'll slip in that quick gift. However, regardless of how you frame the conversation or how you frame the invitation from the front, these folks are not going to fill out a pledge card. This group of folks are found in every single parish. And I want to really free you all from the idea that you're going to be able to get a 100% participation from everybody who attends your parish. Oftentimes I talk to people that beat themselves up saying, well, we really need 100%. If we could all just be giving, we'd be able to make up the difference. What I want to talk to you today is about a more targeted approach. And what we need to look at is this middle group, the committed, where church is one of many charitable donations. Oftentimes these folks are giving to a lot of different social services. They could be giving to the United Way. They could be giving to their local arts or opera. Maybe they're giving to a lot of their children's activities. So they've got a lot of demands on their money. And what they're looking at in terms of the way they give is that church is one of many priorities. And they could be giving between 2 to 4% of their overall income rather than a larger gift. It's just the committed group that we need to start looking at in terms of cultivating them to becoming spiritually centered, converted givers. So, lose the 100% mentality. Look at your parish. Look at those who could be considered your growth potential. Now, the reason for this is because how you approach these folks is going to be different than how you approach the converted group. So it's important for you to start thinking about, okay, who is in our parish, and how can I connect more effectively with them? Now, Jerry's already started talking to us a little bit about institutional pitches, and that is a very important component. Also, in order to connect that pitch with the audience, we need to start saying, okay, how does our audience, and when I say audience, I don't necessarily mean in terms of entertainment factor, but rather audience in terms of communicating, who are the people that are listening to us. What are the generational characteristics? What do they need to hear, and how do they give? So very briefly, I'm going to go through very quickly. Some things that we know, Pew Research has identified in 2010, 2011, 2012 some very interesting giving characteristics. And I would implore you to look these up because this is a very important piece in terms of how you communicate to your parish. The greatest generation these are the folks that give out of a sense of commitment. They tend to give both their time and their treasure. They are very socially minded, and they're very much community oriented. The baby boomer, however, shifted away from a trust of institutions. So a greatest generation person, on the whole, may be more inclined to trust an institution when the institution says, we need X, Y, and Z. Whereas the baby boomer, by and large, has asked for greatest transparency with their giving. And so the baby boomers tend to be the folks that fall in the committed group. And they're the folks that really need to know. So for every dollar that I give, how much is going to X ministry and how much is going to Y ministry, and why? They're the ones that need a lot of information. Generation X also requires a lot of transparency, but Generation X comes with a bit of more distrust of authority. And so this is an opportunity for you to begin cultivating relationships. They're very much relationally oriented. And this is where that one-on-one piece that Jerry was talking about becomes very important. They are not completely inclined to see their giving as an investment. They will see it as a philanthropic gift. So when you start thinking about how you communicate your messaging for prioritizing charitable donations, you want to start talking about the reason why this parish is important to me in this context is that it fulfills X, Y, and Z, and start naming it in that type of pitch. Finally, the millennial. The millennial is the most, at this point, misunderstood generation. We saw with the Barack Obama campaign a different type of giving that was very successful, which was the millennial turned fundraising on its head and said, no longer are we completely driven by large major donors, but rather what we can do is by one-on-one contact through virtually and through technology, we can develop a sense of community that allows people to give what they can. Now the millennial, this is a very interesting piece because the millennial generation tends to move anywhere between 3 and 5 times within 10 years. So a millennial might not be able to spend very much time at your parish. However, millennials are also known, we've been learning about in the job force, for the fact that they need mentorship. They are looking for moms and dads because they have a very different relationship with their parents than do the Generation X and the baby boomers. They're looking for mentorship. And providing mentorship through stewardship is a direct way in which you can connect with your donors. So, Jerry talked about moving away from the standard letter. And oftentimes when I go into parishes, this is what they're doing. They are sending out a letter. Now, the nonprofit world talks about how you can expect a 1 to 3% return rate from a nonprofit. However, now we had talked about the Indiana University. According to the Center for Philanthropy at Indiana University, when a committed person asks another committed person, the average increases of the gift to 19%, unless the gift is for a religious institution, in which case the average increases to 41%. So you're moving away from a 1 to 3% average to a 41% just by doing what Jerry recommended earlier, which is this idea of more personal contact. Now, I noticed that many of you talked about moving to year-round education in terms of stewardship. This is a very different approach than the annual fall drive. Now, Jerry had talked about the NPR announcement and the thank you, and I think that that's a tremendous opportunity. one of the things I like to recommend to parishes to do is something that you can easily do any Sunday morning is to stand up and say, thank you, such and such, for that beautiful choir piece that reminds us all of why our giving is important to this parish. Or you can have specific speakers that are outlined throughout the year to get up and to talk about specific ministries, which is a wonderful opportunity to invite newcomers that might be new to your parish or existing members to new ministries. So not only are you plugging a new ministry, but you're also reminding people of where their dollars are going and why it's important. You can also engage people early on in February and March on stewardship series. We at the Episcopal Church Foundation, we really like to use Henry Nouwen as a wonderful theologian who talks a lot about giving as ministry. He is able to provide a theology that's very accessible to folks of all theology knowledge. I myself am married to a rector, and so I get tired of a lot of the eschatologies and, soteriologies. I have a hard time hearing that. But Henry Nouwen provides a great outline for fundraising that can be used February, March, April. It's good to do these things before the fall drive, because that way people see this as part of their daily life. This isn't just a check that we write in the fall or pledge card, but that this can be incorporated into all of our being holistically. Finally, this idea of thanking donors. The United Way did something very wonderful, which is that they have this idea that you need to thank your donors 7 different ways. Now that, when I tell people that, I tend to hear a gasp, right? We hear a, oh my goodness. But there are many different ways to thank people besides the thank you card, although the thank you card goes a long way. There's the one-on-one. There is having a thank you column in your newsletter or in your bulletin that highlights, thanks to your generous giving, such and such has been able to take place. It's also a wonderful way to highlight volunteers, because many times we hear, well, X, Y, and Z parish, we really give of our talent as much as our giving. So having a volunteer of the month is another way to thank people, or a volunteer of the week. But it's this idea of the more you thank, the more you're able to educate about stewardship. Now, different stewardship theologies. A theology is a way of looking at a particular area of our faith. Now, stewardship can come with lots of different weighted ideas. When we think about how to connect our messaging to others, it's important for us to realize that people come to the table with different ideas, and some of them are ideas that we can really work with. Now, fundraising as ministry is one of those, and the one that I talked about with Henry Nouwen, in which we often ascribe to. We also ascribe to this idea of attitude of gratitude, which Oprah made very popular. The more we have to be grateful for, the more that we can give thanks for and give out of our abundance. Many, as Jerry was describing, talk about a fulfillment of biblical obligation. One parish I talked about how they were building a kitchen, and one of the members brought a microwave, and it was an old microwave. And the priest talked to the donor and said, why would you give an old microwave to this kitchen? God doesn't want our old microwave. God wants our brand new microwave that can be accessible for all. Why is it that when we write out our annual stewardship pledge, we think about, well, what's left over, instead of what is it that we can give that is of new blessing? Emotional needs or connections. So oftentimes people have sacred events that have taken place in their life, a funeral of a loved one, a wedding, a baptism. These are important things to remember. These are important things to remind others about, that people have a shared legacy and their community becomes family. Reminding people of that is very important in terms of the oral tradition of the parish, but also very important in terms of education of stewardship. Giving back to God a proportion of what is God's, giving as an extension of self-identification with community, and reciprocity. Reciprocity is the idea of this is what we expect as a member of the parish, and oftentimes this is an opportunity for parishes to talk about what does it mean to be a member here? What are the expectations? So when thinking about your messaging, it's important to be able to connect to these different stewardship theologies. Now finally, with the last few minutes, communicating impact, the mission-based budget. Now, going back to our generational characteristics, thinking about that baby boomer, thinking about that generational X that have a bit of a distrust about the church and about institutions. Communicating impact with the mission-based budget is an important resource. Now, before I go into this resource is not a panacea for all that ails your congregation. And this is only going to be as good as the buy-in for it, the process by which you do it. So know that when we have a final product for this, it's very helpful. But in it, this is just one tool for communicating impact. And it's very important that people are engaged in the process all along the way. So when thinking about the narrative budget, oftentimes when people do budgeting, and it's oftentimes a very sticky situation. Billy Graham once said, show me a person's checkbook and I'll show them their priorities. So in terms of churches, we often look to the Excel spreadsheet budget, which I'm a big fan of Excel spreadsheets. In fact, my husband likes to make fun of me because I put everything on an Excel spreadsheet. However, in terms of motivating people to give, it's very difficult if you just hand them this Excel spreadsheet and say, this is where your money is going, and they see X, Y, and Z for church pension, X, Y, and Z for, for organist, and insurance, et cetera. How does that relate to our overall mission? How does that relate to what our vision is in programming? This is an opportunity for you to connect the nuts and bolts numbers with your mission. So we use leader. First, list your ministries and appoint a team. Then, taking that team, elaborate on these ministries. What are they doing? Who do they serve? What is the impact? Not just that we have a children's ministry and 22 people participate, but rather, how are kids being transformed by your children's ministry? Not just we have a food pantry and 22,000 bags of lettuce were handed out, but rather, how were people's lives changed by receiving food? This is what's going to be motivational. Arrange your ministries into a narrative using that impact. People want to hear stories. People want to feel as though they are part of the story. They don't just want to be talked to, they want to know how they are involved into the story. Distribute and communicate these ministries. And then here comes the vital piece. Engage with the congregation. Ask them about stories, about ministry, and about the impact that they're hearing about. Engage them in how to create this budget together, and remind them as you go through the process of the vitality and the vibrance of your parish. So here's an example of a narrative budget that I like. This is from 2009. Oh, I don't know if we can get this up. I hope that helped.
That's up.
Okay. So what we have here is a breakdown, and what you'll see is in yellow, different headers. You'll see worship and pastoral care, administration and finance, and finance, formation and community, and such and such. And so what they've done is they've broken it down into overall categories. Now on the left and right, you hear narratives, personal testimonies as to how newcomers felt connected and how recipients of those ministries felt impacted. On the lower right, especially, there's a wonderful little tale of how a person was impacted by a ministry. Now, if you can't see this very clearly, rest assured you should have received an email from Jim Murphy, and perhaps there'll be a follow-up email as well, where we provide a link to this model. This is a great example of how a parish was able to communicate impact. Here is a great quote talking about, for which of you intending to build a tower in Luke does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation, is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. From the very beginning, from the very early church, this idea of finance being part of the overall ministry of the church was very much part of the conversation. So, are there questions?
There actually are a few, Erin, and I'm going to pose them to both you and to Jerry. But
Please.
if I may, just to make sure that everyone is aware, we will be sending copies of those things that you had up on the screen that unfortunately didn't come through too well in this presentation.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You'll get copies of that as well as copies of all the slides. And this was also sent out in the email with the link to tonight's webinar. So, yes, and so now I'm going to ask some questions. And I'm sorry, my screen had jumped there for a minute. There is an important question by Pat Yankus up on the screen right now, and either Jerry or Erin, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, because it is important. As all of us know, almost half of a congregation is, in an Episcopal congregation, is typically folks who didn't grow up Episcopal. And can you answer that question Pat had posed?
What you mean about the where the parish doesn't have a tradition of talking openly about money?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's how do you engage congregants that have a religious tradition that does not have stewardship as a part of their experience? I'm sorry, I had highlighted it on your presenter notes.
Well, I see it, but I mean, is it that you just don't talk about money?
Well, why don't you answer that question, Jerry? Answer that question then.
Well, I think, you know, it's everything has to be, in my mind, everything has to be presented as an invitation, not as an obligation. And it's about giving people ways to achieve the spiritual connection and the spiritual formation that they're there to find. And money is a very powerful way to do it. If people think that it's kind of embarrassing to talk about money or something like that, the topic has to be introduced slowly. I think, you know, the experience of a member of the congregation who has found giving in some way to be transformational, that experience can be highlighted in some way, the person talk about it. And bit by bit, you start to be able to talk about money in the right ways. I mean, once I did a proportional giving sermon at a little parish up, little country parish in the northern part of the Diocese of New York. And at the end of the service, a lady about my mother's age came up to me and said, "Thank you. That was the first sermon I've ever heard about money that didn't make me mad." And I thanked her, and we chatted and stuff. But then on the way home, I thought to myself, that woman's been in church every Sunday of her life for 85 years. She's heard hundreds of sermons about money from lots of different people, and they have all made her mad. So I think it's important to be able to talk about money in ways that don't make people mad. And it's usually conveying anxiety, guilt, and obligation that make people sullen and mad. And so there's...
I would agree with you, Jerry. That makes a lot of sense. Erin, I'm curious for you to answer the question perhaps a little bit differently. because within the Episcopal Church, there are folks that, have heard these words stewardship, and it means something very different to them. How do you engage people when, they hear the word stewardship and don't think in the way that we would be talking about tonight? Are there any prescriptions that you can think of that you would like to share in a related way?
Yeah. So, first of all, it's important to know that there are a lot of traditions out there, denominationally speaking and culturally speaking, that don't have a tradition of stewardship. And yet there is this sense of giving and articulating a sense of giving. We at the Episcopal Church, we often can confuse what stewardship is. Specifically what I mean by that is stewardship is a sum total in terms of holistically of our lives and how we give them to God. But in terms of parishes, it's not just parish administration that we're talking about, but it's rather a theology and education. It's developing a spirituality. And so part of this is what Jerry was talking about, not making people mad, but also it's engaging people in thinking about why do we give and who do we want to be as a giving congregation. Are we a giving congregation? Who do we say that we are? If we're a welcoming congregation, which many people in the Episcopal Church talk about, what does that mean about our giving? If we are a hospitality-minded congregation, if we are a family-minded congregation, what does this mean about our giving? And so in terms of talking about how do you relate to people that don't already have a connection to stewardship, I think it's very important to begin with a sense of value. What is it that your parish values, and how do you connect that to giving? Now, there was one other question I wanted to talk about. There were some people that were asking about what are some of the Nouwen books that I would recommend for theology of giving. There is a Henry Nouwen book called The Fundraising of Giving, or Fundraising as Ministry, excuse me. That's $1.95. And you can order it online, and I definitely recommended it to people for book studies, for stewardship chairs, for education. And I would highlight that to you. Also, if you go to, people were asking about Pew Research, if you go to the Pew Research Center online, you can find the study that I just talked about, Spirituality of Fundraising. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Erin. And we do need to close up tonight, and thank you. It is the Spirituality of Fundraising that Nouwen has written. There are a number of resources that we're going to share with you following this webinar, because we do have all of your email addresses, and we're happy to do that. There's also a sermon that Jerry Kuchar has written on proportional giving that we will get from Jerry and send that out as another attachment. So Jerry, you can certainly forward that to me.
Okay.
As we wrap up for this evening, I will start my webcam so you can see my funny face. But I just wanted to make sure that one point was very clear from our beginning, and that is that the Episcopal Church Foundation focuses on empowering congregations. We do that obviously in a number of different ways. One of the most important ways that we found over the past few years are these webinars that we've had. We've had them in a variety of options. We're doing many, many more video webinars like this, and technology has its own challenges. But we have recordings of all of these webinars that we'd be more than happy to share with you. They are free to you and easy for you to record. So please know that we will be sending you an email, and you can certainly respond and ask for any of the webinars on recording. We're happy to share them with you. In addition, I just want to draw your attention that we will have a number of free webinars coming up. In fact, the next 2 Tuesdays, we will have webinars coming up. Next Tuesday, we will have our program director, Terry Mathis, who's based out in California, do our Basics of a Capital Campaign webinar. This is a very popular webinar, so if you haven't signed up yet and you'd like to, please feel free to do so soon. It's, like all of our webinars, free and available to you and your leadership. We'll be having the next week on April 23rd an additional annual stewardship workshop focusing on making the case for your parish. Now, if you've seen the description online, the online description is, why should I give money to you? Which is an important thing that many parishes neglect to realize. As Aaron and Jerry have both been talking about tonight, the world is very different from the past, and parishes have to demonstrate the impact that they're having, the difference that they're making. You can't just trust that people will automatically give to the church just because you expect them to. You do need to prove your case. That will be led by Charles LaFond, who's the Stewardship and Congregational Life Officer from the Diocese of New Hampshire. For those of you out there that are from a diocese, you are more than welcome to join us for a diocesan level workshop focusing on major donors and the stewardship and theology of gathering in major donations. That will also be headed by Terry Mathis. Finally, we're very, very proud to say that we will have our very first webinar on stewardship in Espanol on May 16th. So if you have friends who are in Spanish-speaking congregations that would like to attend, this will be a fully in Spanish webinar, so it would be wonderful if everyone who can participate will be there. It would be wonderful to have you there. And just in closing, I just wanted to thank everyone who participated in tonight's workshop, especially our two wonderful presenters, Jerry Kuchar and Aaron Weber-Johnson. They have done, as I mentioned before, some wonderful work, not only with working on capital campaigns across the country, but also doing some very specialized consulting on fee-for-service consulting with particular parishes across the country in the area of annual stewardship. I'd also like to thank Leslie Pendleton, another of our wonderful staff who is also a capital campaign consultant, and Julie Lytle, who none of you have seen tonight, but I'm very happy to say Julie Lytle works with the Province 1 diocese and has been instrumental in implementing our video webinar capabilities here at the Episcopal Church Foundation and in many parts throughout the Episcopal Church. And if this is something that you think your parish, your diocese, your Episcopal organization could use, please let me know. I'm happy to share Julie's information. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We are at the end of our time tonight, and thank you for coming. Thank you for the wonderful work that you are doing in your congregations, and Godspeed. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you, and good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye. Thank